I never imagined I'd be sharing my story here, but life is a twisted way of surprising you. My wife, Megan, and I had been married for 10 years. We weren't perfect, but we made it work, shared laughs, inside jokes, and the occasional sauna trip with my best friend, Andrew. If someone had told me I'd lose it all over a kitchen counter and a sauna rendezvous, I'd have laughed in their face. The first sign of trouble came subtly. Megan started acting distant. She dismissed my attempts at conversation, claimed she was tired, or that I was imagining things. I let it slide. Everyone has rough patches, right? But it wasn't long before her lies became more obvious. "I'll be late tonight, catching up on emails at the office," she'd say, only for her hair to smell like cologne when she returned. Andrew, ever the charming jokester, assured me I was overthinking. After all, Megan was a saint in his eyes, or so I thought. It all came crashing down one seemingly ordinary evening. I had just finished preparing for a sauna session with Andrew, something we'd done countless times. Megan rarely joined us, claiming she didn't see the appeal. But that night, I suggested she come along. I thought maybe it would be a chance for us to reconnect. Little did I know, inviting her was the first domino in the chain that would ruin everything. When I suggested Megan join Andrew and me for our usual sauna night, I half expected her to say no. Megan rarely got excited about these things, always calling them your boy stuff. She'd usually pass, preferring to stay home with her Netflix dramas or a glass of wine. But this time, she hesitated, her gaze flicking to the side like she was thinking it over, or maybe calculating something. Then came the smile, that bright but oddly artificial one she'd started using more often lately. "Sure," she said, shrugging like it was no big deal. "Why not? Might be fun." Her answer threw me off for a second, but I figured, hey, this was a chance to shake off some of the tension that had been hanging between us. Lately, things had felt different. She was distracted, always on her phone or finding reasons to avoid alone time with me. I thought this could be a way to bridge that gap, remind us of the connection we'd always had. Andrew, on the other hand, was all in. "Finally, I was starting to think you didn't believe our sauna nights were real," he said, laughing as he clapped me on the back. "Welcome to the big leagues, Megan." I laughed too, even though something about his enthusiasm nagged at me. Still, I brushed it off. This was Andrew, my best friend since college, the guy who'd been there for everything. From road trips to hospital visits, he was like a brother. There was no reason for me to think otherwise. No reason to notice the way his eyes lingered on Megan for just a second too long. That night, everything seemed fine at first. We headed to Andrew's place where the sauna setup was. It was a tradition at this point. Andrew had his usual playlist going, a mix of indie rock and throwback hits. We grabbed drinks, and for the first hour it was like old times. We joked about work, shared random stories, and Megan even seemed to be having fun. She laughed at Andrew's jokes, her face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen in weeks. I remember thinking, this is good. Maybe things are turning around. But then came the moment. I had to step away to take a call from a client. It was one of those irritatingly timed work emergencies that couldn't wait, and I figured I'd be back in 5 minutes tops. "You too, behave," I joked as I left, glancing over my shoulder as I closed the door. The call dragged longer than I'd planned, closer to 20 minutes. By the time I returned, everything looked off. Megan and Andrew were sitting on opposite sides of the bench, their towels draped carefully over their laps. They were talking, but the conversation felt stilted, almost rehearsed. Megan was rambling about some recipe she wanted to try, a topic so out of left field that it made me pause. Andrew was nodding along, but his expression was tight, almost uncomfortable. The air in the room was different. It wasn't the usual relaxed vibe we'd always had. It was heavy, charged with something I couldn't quite name. Megan wouldn't meet my eyes as I sat down, and Andrew seemed extra eager to talk about anything but whatever I'd missed. "Dude, your phone's been buzzing nonstop," Andrew said, gesturing to my pocket. His tone was casual, but his face gave him away. There was a tension in his voice, a tightness in his jaw that set my teeth on edge. Megan chimed in quickly, too quickly. "Yeah, you were gone forever. Did everything get sorted with work?" Her voice was light, but the way she tugged at the edge of her towel told me something was off. My stomach twisted, but I brushed it aside. Paranoia wasn't going to help. I forced myself to act normal, cracking a joke about how my job could probably survive one night without me. They both laughed, but the laughter didn't reach their eyes. As the night went on, the unease settled deeper into my chest. The tension in the room wasn't just in my head. Megan barely touched me for the rest of the evening, and Andrew, usually full of energy and antics, seemed distracted, like he was constantly on the verge of leaving. I chalked it up to a weird mood, not realizing I was staring at the first crack in the foundation of my life. Looking back, I wonder how I missed it. The flushed faces, the awkward distance, the way Andrew's jokes lacked their usual punch. It was all there, screaming at me to pay attention. But at the time, I convinced myself it was nothing. Just a weird vibe, just a bad night. If only I'd known what was really happening while I was gone. If only I'd walked back into that sauna sooner. The morning after that sauna night, something didn't sit right. Megan had barely spoken to me after we got home, claiming she was tired and heading straight to bed. I didn't push her. Why would I? A little quiet after a late night wasn't unusual. But as I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind wouldn't stop replaying the scene in the sauna. Megan's sudden chatter about recipes, Andrew's tight-lipped expressions, the heavy silence that followed every forced laugh. I didn't sleep much that night. By the time Megan stirred the next morning, I was already up, sipping coffee and scrolling aimlessly on my phone. I heard her shuffle into the kitchen, her movements slow and deliberate like she was testing the waters. "Morning," she said, her voice light but not warm. "Morning," I replied without looking up. She poured herself a cup of coffee and leaned against the counter, staring out the window. "You're up early," she said after a moment, her tone too casual. "Couldn't sleep," I muttered. There was a pause, too long to feel normal. I glanced up and caught her watching me, her lips pressed into a thin line. When our eyes met, she looked away quickly, focusing on stirring her coffee like it held the secrets of the universe. "What's up with you?" I asked, trying to sound relaxed even though my chest felt tight. "Nothing," she said, too quickly. "Why?" I shrugged, forcing a chuckle. "You're acting weird," she scoffed, rolling her eyes. "Me? You're the one sitting here like you're interrogating me. What's your deal?" Her defensive tone threw me off. Megan wasn't the confrontational type, not unless she was hiding something. I felt my stomach twist again, that same unease I'd felt the night before creeping back in. "Forget it," I said, standing up and grabbing my mug. "Just tired, I guess." I kissed her on the forehead as I passed, a gesture that felt more automatic than genuine. She flinched slightly, or maybe I imagined it. Either way, the doubt was eating me alive. I needed clarity, but I didn't know where to start. Confronting her outright seemed extreme. I had no proof of anything, and accusing her without cause could make things worse. But the nagging feeling in my gut refused to quiet down. Something wasn't right, and I couldn't shake the sense that the truth was right in front of me, just out of reach. That afternoon, Andrew texted me like nothing had happened. "Andrew, yo, bro. Sauna night was awesome. Let's hit the trails next weekend." I stared at the message for a long time, trying to decode every word. Was this him being his usual self? Or was it a cover for something else? Was I going crazy, reading into things that weren't there? Against my better judgment, I replied, "Me, for sure. Let me check my schedule." He responded almost immediately with a thumbs-up emoji. It was so normal, so Andrew, that for a second I almost convinced myself I was overthinking everything. But as the day wore on, the doubts came creeping back. Why had Megan been so quick to agree to the sauna? Why had Andrew been acting so strange? And why couldn't I shake the feeling that the 20 minutes I spent on that phone call had been enough time for something unforgivable to happen? I didn't know it yet, but that was the day I started pulling the threads that would unravel my entire life. The gnawing sense of unease didn't leave me. If anything, it grew stronger with every passing hour. That night, as Megan sat on the couch scrolling through her phone, I couldn't take my eyes off her. She was smiling faintly, her fingers tapping rapidly across the screen. I hated myself for the thoughts creeping into my mind. Is she texting him? Who's so funny? I asked, keeping my tone light. She barely glanced up. Oh, just a group chat. Jen sent some ridiculous meme. Her explanation was casual enough, but the way she locked her phone and set it down a little too quickly made my pulse quicken. She turned to me, flashing a quick smile. What's up with you lately? You've been acting weird. Me? I forced a chuckle. I could say the same about you. She rolled her eyes, grabbing the TV remote. Here we go. What now? Did I forget to wash a cup or something? Her sarcasm hit a nerve. Normally, I'd let it slide, but tonight it felt like a deliberate deflection. I don't know, Megan. You tell me. You've been distant. Is there something going on I should know about? Her head whipped toward me, her eyes narrowing. What's that supposed to mean? Nothing. I shrugged, leaning back in my chair. It's just, I don't know. You've seemed off lately. That's all. She shook her head, letting out a dry laugh. You're unbelievable. You know that? You work late, barely pay attention to what's going on around here. And now you're accusing me of something? You're paranoid. Her words stung, but what hurt more was the venom behind them. This wasn't Megan. At least not the Megan I thought I knew. I didn't accuse you of anything, I said quietly, my fists clenching under the table. But you're awfully defensive for no reason. She stood abruptly, grabbing her phone and heading toward the bedroom. I don't have time for this, she muttered over her shoulder. As soon as the door clicked shut, I felt my stomach churn. That conversation only confirmed what I didn't want to admit. Something was going on, and I needed to find out what. The next day, while Megan was out running errands, I decided to search her phone. I hated the idea, but the nagging suspicion was eating me alive. She'd changed her passcode months ago, claiming it was because she wanted more privacy. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it. Now it felt like a brick wall I needed to scale. But I knew Megan's habits. She wasn't one to stray far from the obvious. After a few failed attempts, I tried the birth date of her childhood dog, Max Bingo. I scrolled through her messages, my heart pounding so hard I could barely see straight. Most of the threads were harmless, family, work chats, friends. But then I saw it, a conversation buried under the name May. It didn't take a genius to figure out who that was. The messages were short, but they spoke volumes. Hey, last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about it. Megan, we have to be careful. He's already suspicious. Don't worry. He doesn't know a thing. The words blurred as I stared at the screen. My mind raced, trying to process what I was seeing. This wasn't just paranoia. It wasn't me overthinking. It was real. Megan and Andrew had crossed a line, my best friend and my wife. And judging by the messages, it had started long before the sauna night. I felt sick, my hands trembling as I locked her phone and set it back on the counter. The room spun around me, every detail of the past few months replaying in my head like a twisted movie. The lies, the glances, the strange tension, all of it made sense now. I had to confront her, but I wasn't ready yet. I needed more, proof so undeniable that she couldn't talk her way out of it. This wasn't just betrayal. It was war. By the time Megan returned from her errands, I had calmed myself down, or at least I appeared calm. Inside, I was a hurricane of rage, hurt, and disbelief. I knew confronting her right then would only give her room to lie, twist the narrative, or worse, cover her tracks. No, I needed a plan. I wasn't just going to ask her what was going on. I was going to catch her red-handed. Hey, she said breezily as she walked in, setting down her shopping bags. Did you eat anything yet? I grabbed a few things for dinner. Her tone was casual, almost too casual. I couldn't stop wondering if it was guilt or just Megan being Megan. I decided to play along. Not yet. What did you get? She started unpacking groceries, rambling about some new recipe she wanted to try, probably the same one she'd mentioned in the sauna. The irony made my blood boil, but I forced myself to smile and nod, my face betraying none of the chaos inside me. That night, I waited until she was asleep before making my next move. Megan had left her phone charging on the nightstand, and I couldn't risk her catching me again. Instead, I focused on Andrew. If they thought they were going to outsmart me, They were dead wrong. I pulled out my own phone and started combing through Andrew's social media. It was a long shot, but I figured if there were any breadcrumbs, I'd find them. He was meticulous about keeping up appearances, pictures of his dog, motivational quotes, and the occasional group shot that included me. But one post stood out, a blurry photo from a hiking trail. The caption read, "Best views with the best company." I stared at the picture, the pieces slowly clicking into place. The photo wasn't remarkable on its own, just a scenic overlook, but the comments section caught my eye. "Megan, that was such an amazing day. Can't wait for the next adventure. Andrew, always better with you." My stomach churned. This wasn't a smoking gun, but it was another thread to pull. I scrolled back through his older posts, noting every time Megan's name popped up in the comments. It wasn't just the sauna night. They'd been meeting up for months, maybe longer, right under my nose. I needed more, though, something undeniable. The next day, I installed a GPS tracker app on Megan's phone while she was in the shower. It was risky, but I couldn't let her lies continue unchecked. I needed to know exactly where she was going, who she was meeting, and how deep this betrayal ran. That afternoon, I made an excuse to stay home while Megan headed out for a hair appointment. I watched the app, my heart pounding as the little dot representing her phone left the house. It wasn't long before she veered away from the salon and toward an all-too-familiar neighborhood. Andrew's house. I gripped my phone so hard my knuckles turned white. The app showed her staying there for 2 hours. Too long. Agonizing hours. I thought about driving over, kicking the door in, and ending it all right then and there. But I held back. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. It was about making them pay. When she got home later, I didn't say a word. She walked in like nothing had happened, humming to herself as she put her keys down. "What did you do today?" she asked, her tone cheerful. "Just worked on some stuff around the house," I replied, keeping my voice even. She smiled, walking past me to the kitchen, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I watched her go, my jaw clenched so tightly it ached. This wasn't over. If they thought they could betray me and get away with it, they were about to learn how wrong they were, that I knew I couldn't hold on to this secret much longer. Watching Megan stroll around the house, acting like nothing was wrong, was tearing me apart. Every laugh, every casual "I love you," felt like a slap in the face. But I couldn't just explode. I needed to be smart. If I confronted her without solid proof, she'd deny it, spin the story, and make me out to be paranoid. No, this had to be airtight. Over the next few days, I used the GPS tracker to monitor her every move. Her errands and girls' nights always seemed to involve a detour to Andrew's house. Sometimes it was a quick stop. Other times, she stayed for hours. Each notification from the tracker felt like a punch to the gut, but it also fueled my determination. Then, as if fate wanted to twist the knife further, Andrew texted me. "Andrew, beer and a game this weekend? Miss hanging out with you, bro?" The audacity of it all made my blood boil. I stared at the message for a long time, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. Part of me wanted to blow up on him right then and there, but I forced myself to play it cool. "Me? Sounds good. Saturday work?" He replied almost instantly, completely oblivious to the storm brewing. "Andrew, perfect. Bring some snacks. I'll handle the drinks." I had a plan now, and it was simple. Confront them both together. If they wanted to play me for a fool, I'd make sure they saw exactly how wrong they were. That Saturday, I told Megan I'd be spending the evening at Andrew's for a guys' night. She barely reacted, just nodded and muttered, "Have fun." I couldn't help but notice she seemed almost relieved, like my absence was a convenience for her. When I got to Andrew's house, he greeted me with his usual grin, holding out a beer. "Man, it's been too long," he said, clapping me on the back. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Way too long." We settled into the living room, the game playing on the TV. But I wasn't watching. My mind was racing, trying to anticipate every excuse, every lie he'd try to feed me. I waited until he was mid-sip of his beer before I spoke. "So, Andrew," I said casually, leaning back in my chair, "how long have you been screwing my wife?" He choked, nearly spitting out his drink. His face went pale as he set the bottle down, staring at me with wide eyes. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Don't play dumb," I said, my voice steady but cold. I know about the texts, the meetups, the sauna night. All of it." He opened his mouth to speak, but no words came out. For the first time since I'd known him, Andrew looked genuinely afraid. "I didn't," he stammered, but I cut him off. "Don't lie to me," I snapped, leaning forward. "I have proof. The tracker, the messages, everything. So, do yourself a favor and come clean." Andrew slumped back in his chair, his hands covering his face. "It wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "I don't even know how it started. 1 minute, we were talking, and the next. Spare me the details," I said, my hands clenched into fists. "I trusted you. I trusted her. And this is what you both do behind my back." He looked up, his eyes filled with something that might have been regret, or maybe just fear of the consequences. "I'm sorry," he said weakly. "Save it," I snapped, standing up. "You're not sorry. You're sorry you got caught." I walked to the door, my heart pounding. "This isn't over, Andrew. Not by a long shot." As I stepped outside, I dialed Megan's number. "We need to talk," I said as soon as she picked up. Her voice was wary. "What's wrong?" "Meet me at home. Now." The confrontation with Andrew was just the first battle. The war wasn't over yet. When I got home, the house was eerily quiet. Megan's car was already in the driveway, so I knew she was inside, likely pacing or sitting on the couch, rehearsing whatever excuses she thought might save her. My hands trembled as I turned the doorknob, not out of fear, but from the barely contained anger bubbling inside me. She was sitting at the kitchen table, her phone in front of her. The way her eyes darted up at me as I walked and told me everything I needed to know, she already suspected what this was about. "What's going on?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but her voice cracked just enough to give her away. I didn't sit down. Instead, I tossed my phone on the table, opened to a screenshot of her text with Andrew. "Explain this," I said coldly. Her face went pale, and for a moment, she just stared at the screen. Then, in true Megan fashion, she leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms like this was some kind of debate. "Where did you get that?" "Don't deflect," I snapped. "Answer the question. How long has this been going on?" She exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "I don't know what you're talking about." I slammed my hand on the table, making her jump. "Don't lie to me. I know everything, Megan. The sauna night, the texts, the meetups at Andrew's house. Do you really think I'm that stupid?" Her bravado cracked, and she looked away, her jaw tightening. "It wasn't supposed to happen," she muttered, her voice barely audible. "Wasn't supposed to happen?" I repeated, my voice rising. "You don't just accidentally screw your husband's best friend, Megan. You made a choice, a disgusting, selfish choice, and you've been lying to me for months." Tears welled up in her eyes, but they didn't move me. "I was lonely," she said, her voice trembling. "You're always so busy, always working." I felt invisible, and Andrew, he was there. He made me feel noticed. "Don't you dare blame this on me," I said, my voice cold and sharp. "I've been working my ass off to give us a good life, and this is how you repay me? By sneaking around behind my back." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears streaming down her face now. "Sorry doesn't cut it," I said, pacing the kitchen. "You betrayed me. You betrayed everything we built together. Do you even realize what you've done?" Her tears turned into sobs, but I wasn't done. "And what about Andrew's wife? Did you think about her? About the kids? Or was your precious attention all that mattered to you?" She shook her head, covering her face with her hands. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," she choked out. "Well, it did," I said, my voice steady despite the storm inside me. "And now, you're going to live with the consequences." She looked up at me, her face pale and streaked with tears. "What does that mean?" "It means this marriage is over," I said bluntly. "I'm filing for divorce, and I'm making sure everyone knows exactly why." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, Real fear flickered across her face. "Wait, please." "No," I said firmly. "You made your choice, Megan. Now I'm making mine." I walked out of the room, leaving her sobbing at the table. For the first time in weeks, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The path forward wouldn't be easy, but at least I knew one thing. I wasn't going to let their betrayal define me. That I spent the night on the couch, staring at the ceiling while Megan cried herself to sleep in the bedroom. I couldn't bear to be near her, not after everything I'd uncovered. The anger hadn't subsided. It simmered under the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. But more than the anger, there was a deep, aching sadness. My wife, my best friend, the two people I trusted most in the world, had ripped my life apart. The next morning, Megan approached me in the kitchen, her face pale and blotchy from crying all night. She looked like a shadow of the woman I used to love. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. "There's nothing left to say," I replied, not even looking up from my coffee. "Please, Tyler," she pleaded, stepping closer. "I know I hurt you, but we can fix this. I'll do whatever it takes." I stood up abruptly, slamming my mug down on the counter. "Fix this? You want to fix this?" My voice was rising now, the dam of anger finally breaking. "You didn't just break a vase, Megan. You shattered my trust, our marriage, and our lives. There's no going back from this." Her lower lip trembled, but I refused to let her tears sway me. "What about the kids?" she whispered. "What are we going to tell them?" "The truth," I said without hesitation. "That their mother couldn't keep her vows, and their father is done being a fool." Her face crumpled, and she started to cry again, but I wasn't moved. "Megan," I said coldly, "you don't get to play the victim here. You didn't think about the kids when you were sneaking off to Andrew's house, so don't start pretending to care now." She didn't have a response for that, just sank into a chair and buried her face in her hands. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, needing fresh air before I said something I might regret. That afternoon, I made my next move. I called Carla, Andrew's wife. She deserved to know the truth as much as I did. "Hey, Carla," I said when she picked up. My voice was steady, though my chest was tight with nerves. "Tyler? Everything okay?" she asked, her tone concerned. "Not really," I admitted. "We need to talk. It's about Andrew and Megan." There was a pause on the line, and I could hear her breath hitch. "What about them?" she asked cautiously. "I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this," I said, swallowing hard, "but they've been having an affair." The silence that followed was deafening. When she finally spoke, her voice was shaky. "How? How do you know?" "I have proof," I said simply. "Texts, GPS tracking, everything. I confronted Andrew last night. He admitted it." Carla let out a shaky breath, followed by a bitter laugh. "Of course he did," she said, her voice breaking. I knew something was off, but I didn't want to believe it. We talked for a while, sharing details and piecing together the timeline of their betrayal. By the end of the conversation, we had a plan. Carla wasn't the type to let something like this slide, and neither was I. That evening, Megan and I sat the kids down. She tried to take the lead, but I cut her off. "Your mom and I are separating," I said, keeping my voice as calm as possible. "There are some things that happened that we can't fix." The kids cried, of course, and Megan tried to console them, but I couldn't stay. I grabbed a bag and headed to a hotel for the night, leaving her to deal with the fallout. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, paperwork, and tense conversations. Carla, true to her word, filed for divorce from Andrew, and the two of us stayed in touch, providing each other with updates and support. Megan, on the other hand, seemed to grow more desperate with each passing day. "Please, Tyler," she begged one night. "I'll do anything to make this right." But it was too late. The bridges were burned, and I had no interest in rebuilding them. After Megan realized I wasn't going to budge, her behavior shifted. The tears and pleas were replaced by cold indifference and occasional bursts of anger. She accused me of overreacting, of blowing things out of proportion. "You're not perfect, Tyler," she snapped during one argument. "You've been emotionally checked out for years. Maybe if you'd been a better husband, I wouldn't have felt so alone." Her words stung, but they didn't change anything. I refused to let her rewrite the narrative. The betrayal was hers, not mine. Meanwhile, I kept working with my lawyer to finalize the divorce. I made it clear that Megan wasn't walking away with much. The house? Mine. The car? Mine. She could have a small settlement, but that was it. I wasn't going to let her destroy my life and take everything I'd worked for. Carla, on the other hand, was playing her own game. She sent Andrew packing, filing for full custody of their 2 kids. She and I spoke often, venting about our respective betrayals and discussing our plans for the future. There was a strange comfort in knowing I wasn't alone in this mess. It was late on a Tuesday night when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen to see Carla's name flashing. We've been talking more often since everything came to light, sharing updates, piecing together timelines, and admittedly venting about the whirlwind our lives had become. But this time, the tone in her voice was different. "Tyler, are you sitting down?" she asked, her voice shaky. I frowned, setting my glass of whiskey on the counter. "What's going on?" She took a deep breath, and I could hear her pacing on the other end of the line. "I confronted Andrew again tonight. I needed answers, details. And, well, he told me things I didn't expect. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to believe them." "What kind of things?" I asked, bracing myself. "The affair didn't start recently," she said, her voice trembling. "It's been going on for years, Tyler. Years." Her words hit me like a freight train. I gripped the counter, my knuckles white. "How many years?" "He didn't give me an exact timeline," she admitted bitterly. "But from what he let slip, it started long before the sauna night. He mentioned your family barbecues, that weekend trip to the lake house 2 summers ago, even when you were sick last Christmas and stayed home while Megan came to our place for drinks." I felt like the floor had been ripped out from under me. Every memory Carla mentioned replayed in my mind, but now they were warped, sinister, tainted by betrayal. The lake house trip? I'd been the one to suggest it, thinking it would be good for all of us to spend time together. And last Christmas? I trusted Megan when she said she wanted to cheer up Carla during the holidays. "Unbelievable," I muttered, shaking my head. "I was right there, Carla. Right there. And they played me like a fool." "You and me both," she said, her voice hardening. "But it gets worse." "Worse?" My stomach twisted. She hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. Andrew admitted that it wasn't just about the thrill or whatever excuse they used for this crap. They actually talked about leaving us together. He said Megan had brought it up a few times, but they decided it wasn't practical. My breath caught in my throat. Leaving us? They had planned to blow up not just our marriages, but our entire lives, only to discard the idea like it was some minor inconvenience. The audacity made my blood boil. "So what? I was plan B while they got their fun on the side?" I asked, my voice dripping with anger. "Pretty much," Carla said flatly. "But don't worry. I gave him an earful before kicking him out again. I told him if he so much as set foot on my property, I'd call the cops." I let out a bitter laugh. "Good. He deserves worse than that." Carla sighed. "Tyler, this changes everything. They weren't just careless. They were deliberate. They looked us in the eye, lied to us, and made us part of their disgusting little game." She was right, and the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. For years, I had trusted Megan with my whole heart. For years, I had shared meals, laughs, and intimate moments with Andrew, never suspecting a thing. All the while, they'd been using me as a convenient cover for their affair. After I hung up with Carla, I sat in silence for a long time, staring at nothing. My mind raced, replaying every moment, every conversation, every detail I'd ignored. The late nights Megan claimed were work meetings. The way Andrew always seemed to make excuses to hang out with us. The subtle tension at family gatherings. It was all so obvious in hindsight, but I had been too trusting or maybe too naive to see it. I grabbed a notebook and started jotting down everything Carla had told me, alongside my own memories. The pieces were falling into place now, creating a picture that was uglier than anything I could have imagined. They'd been lying to us for years, hiding their betrayal in plain sight. And worst of all, they'd almost gotten away with it. But not anymore. The anger bubbling inside me solidified into something colder, sharper, resolve. I wasn't just going to confront Megan or Andrew again. I was going to make them face every lie, every betrayal, and every ounce of damage they'd caused. They wanted to play games? Fine. But this time, I was the one holding all the cards. I opened my laptop and started going through every piece of evidence I had, screenshots, GPS logs, messages Carla had forwarded me from Andrew's phone. I reached out to my lawyer, explaining everything Carla had just shared. He listened patiently before responding. "This actually strengthens your case," he said. "Their long-term deceit could play a significant role in court. We'll use it to ensure you walk away with everything you deserve, and they don't." "Good," I said, my voice steady. "Let's make sure they regret every second of this." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of control, a glimmer of hope. They thought they'd broken me, but they were about to find out just how wrong they were. The day of the final confrontation was one of those deceptively calm days. The kind where the weather is too perfect, the air is too still, and the world seems oblivious to the storm brewing in your life. I knew what I had to do, and I wasn't going to let Megan or Andrew wriggle their way out of this. They had made their choices, and now they were going to face the consequences. I texted Andrew that morning, pretending to extend an olive branch. We need to talk. Come over tonight. Let's figure out how to move forward." His reply came quickly, as if he thought I'd finally caved. "And absolutely, Mom. Let's put this behind us." Megan, on the other hand, was already home. She spent most of the day avoiding me, skulking around the house like a shadow. She must have known something was coming because every time I walked into the room, she flinched, her eyes darting to the side like a guilty child. By the time evening rolled around, I'd prepared everything. The folder containing all the evidence, every text, GPS log, photo, and call record, was sitting on the kitchen table, ready to blow their web of lies wide open. When Andrew arrived, he strolled in like nothing was wrong, a bottle of wine in hand. "Hey man," he said with that same easy grin that now made my skin crawl. "Glad we're doing this. It's been rough on all of us, huh?" I didn't respond. Instead, I gestured toward the table where Megan was already sitting. She looked up at him, her face pale and drawn. She didn't say a word, just twisted her hands in her lap. Andrew's grin faltered as he glanced between us. What's this about?" "Sit," I said, my voice sharp enough to cut glass. He hesitated for a moment before obeying, lowering himself into the chair across from Megan. I could see the tension in his shoulders now, the way his fingers drummed nervously on the table. I sat down too, taking my time. The silence was suffocating, but I wanted them to squirm. I wanted them to feel every second of the weight pressing down on them. Finally, I slid the folder across the table and leaned back. "Go ahead. Open it." Andrew's hand hovered over the folder for a moment before he flipped it open. His face drained of color as he scanned the contents. Megan peeked over his shoulder, her hand flying to her mouth as she realized what was inside. "I know everything," I said, my voice cold and steady. "The texts, the meetups, the years of lies. All of it." Andrew stammered. "Tyler, listen, it's not what it looks like. Don't insult my intelligence," I snapped. "I've been piecing this together for weeks. The sauna night was just the tip of the iceberg, wasn't it? Family vacations, holidays, my own damn house. Nothing was off limits to you two, was it?" Megan finally found her voice. "It wasn't like that," she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. "We didn't mean to hurt you." "Didn't mean to hurt me?" I said, my voice rising. "You slept with my best friend. You lied to my face for years. And you have the nerve to tell me it wasn't meant to hurt me?" Andrew tried to intervene. "Tyler, man, let's just calm down." "Don't you dare," I growled, turning my glare on him. "You were my best friend, Andrew. I trusted you. I let you into my life, my home. I treated you like family. And this is how you repay me?" He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came out. For once, he had nothing to say. I turned back to Megan, my voice shaking with a mix of rage and heartbreak. "Do you even understand what you've done? You didn't just destroy our marriage. You destroyed everything. Our trust, our family, our future. And for what? Some cheap thrill. Her sobs grew louder, but I didn't feel an ounce of sympathy. I gave you everything, Megan. Everything. And you threw it away like it meant nothing. The room fell silent except for Megan's muffled cries. Andrew sat frozen, his face pale and his hands clenched into fists. I hope it was worth it, I said finally, standing up and grabbing the folder. Because you're about to lose everything. I walked out of the room, leaving them to stew in their guilt and shame. I could still hear Megan's sobs as I headed for the front door, Andrew's voice low as he tried to calm her down. For years, they'd hidden their betrayal behind smiles and lies, but now their perfect little fantasy was crumbling, and I was finally free of them both. Once the dust settled, I was left with a quiet house and a mountain of emotions I wasn't ready to face. The chaos of the past weeks had kept me focused, lawyers, evidence, confrontations. But now, in the silence, reality began to sink in. My marriage was over. My best friend had betrayed me. The life I'd spent years building had crumbled to ash. For the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to just feel everything. The anger, the sadness, the bitterness, it all came crashing down in waves. I sat on the couch, staring at the empty space where Megan's favorite throw pillow used to be, and let the tears come. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't regret. It was grief, for the life I thought I had, for the trust that had been shattered, for the years I'd never get back. But grief is a funny way of forcing you to rebuild. After what felt like hours, I wiped my face, stood up, and took my first step toward healing. The first thing I did was clean the house from top to bottom. It might sound ridiculous, but it felt symbolic. I scrubbed every inch of the place, throwing out anything that reminded me of Megan, her candles, her books, the little knickknacks she insisted on keeping. It was cathartic, like I was reclaiming my space, my life. By the time I was done, the house felt less like a graveyard of memories and more like a blank slate. Next, I threw myself into work. My job had always been demanding, but now was a lifeline, a way to stay busy and keep my mind from wandering back to dark places. I took on new projects, reconnected with colleagues, and even started mentoring younger employees. For the first time in years, I felt like I was thriving professionally. Of course, my kids were my biggest priority. They were hurt and confused, caught in the crossfire of something they didn't understand. I made sure to spend as much time with them as possible, taking them to the park, helping with homework, and even baking cookies badly on weekends. They became my anchor, the reason I got out of bed on the hardest days. Carla was another unexpected source of comfort. We didn't rush into anything romantic. Neither of us was ready for that. But we leaned on each other in a way that only two people who'd been through the same nightmare could. We'd text late into the night, sharing updates, venting about our exes, and even laughing about the absurdity of it all. I think I forgot what it's like to laugh, I told her during one of our calls. Me too, she replied, a smile in her voice. But maybe that's a good sign. Maybe we're finally starting to heal. As the weeks turned into months, the anger I felt toward Megan and Andrew began to fade. It wasn't forgiveness, not by a long shot, but I realized I couldn't carry that weight forever. Holding on to it only gave them more power over me, and I was done letting them take anything else from me. Megan, for her part, tried to reach out a few times. She'd send long, rambling texts about how sorry she was, how she'd made a terrible mistake, how she wanted to fix things for the kids. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. Andrew, on the other hand, stayed silent. Whether it was guilt, shame, or just his usual cowardice, I didn't know, and I didn't care. The man who'd been like a brother to me was gone, replaced by a stranger I wanted nothing to do with. One night, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, I realized something strange. I felt lighter. The pain was still there, like an old scar that ached on rainy days, but it wasn't suffocating me anymore. I had survived the worst betrayal of my life, and I was still standing. The house was quieter now, but it wasn't lonely. It was peaceful. It was mine. I thought about everything I'd lost, but more importantly, I thought about what I'd gained. A fresh start, a deeper bond with my kids, A chance to figure out who I was outside of being a husband or a best friend. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. It didn't take long for Megan's world to start unraveling. After the divorce was finalized, she moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the cozy home we had shared for years. It was one of those soulless places with beige walls and cheap carpeting, the kind of place you rent when you're scrambling to start over. I didn't take pleasure in her struggles, at least not at first. Despite everything, there was still a part of me that remembered the woman I had fallen in love with, the mother of my children. But as time went on and I saw how little remorse she truly had, that part of me withered away. Megan tried to keep up appearances for a while. She posted filtered photos on social media, pretending her new life was glamorous and carefree. But the cracks in her facade started showing quickly. Friends we had shared for years began to pull away, disgusted by her betrayal. The comments under her posts grew sparse, the likes fewer and farther between. Carla and I couldn't help but exchange updates when we heard about her and Andrew. Guess who's not so happy anymore? Carla texted me one afternoon, accompanied by a screenshot of Megan's latest social media post, a vague caption about starting over paired with a picture of a glass of wine. It turned out that Megan and Andrew's little affair hadn't flourished under the light of day. Without the thrill of sneaking around, their relationship crumbled quickly. They fought constantly, blaming each other for the mess their lives had become. Megan told a mutual friend that Andrew's been staying out late and drinking, Carla said during one of our phone calls. The irony is almost too good to be true. That's rich coming from her, I said with a laugh. They deserve each other. The final nail in the coffin came when Megan's job started slipping through her fingers. She had always been reliable at work, but the stress of her crumbling personal life began to show. Missed deadlines turned into disciplinary meetings, and soon she was let go. Without a steady income, she struggled to pay rent and keep up with the lifestyle she had clung to so desperately. One day, she showed up at my door, unannounced and looking disheveled. Her once pristine appearance was gone. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired, and her clothes wrinkled. "Tyler," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What do you want, Megan?" I asked, my tone colder than I'd intended. She hesitated, wringing her hands. I need help. I can't make rent this month, and I was hoping." I raised an eyebrow, cutting her off. "You were hoping I'd bail you out after everything you've done?" Her eyes filled with tears, but I didn't feel the slightest twinge of sympathy. "Tyler, please. I don't have anyone else to turn to." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "You made your choices, Megan. You didn't think about me or the kids when you were sneaking around with Andrew. Why should I clean up your mess now?" She opened her mouth to respond, but closed it again, realizing she had no defense. Without another word, I shut the door, leaving her standing there on the porch. I heard through the grapevine that Megan eventually moved out of town, hoping for a fresh start somewhere far from the people who knew her story. Andrew's fate wasn't much better. Carla had cleaned him out in the divorce, securing the house and custody of their kids. He tried to rebuild his life, but his reputation was in tatters. Friends stopped returning his calls, and he drifted into obscurity. I didn't care where they ended up. Their chapter in my life was over. They had gambled everything on their selfishness and lost. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally free, that it's strange how life has a way of rearranging itself after you've been through hell. For a while, I thought I'd never feel normal again. The betrayal had left a gaping wound, one that I wasn't sure would ever heal. But slowly, piece by piece, things started to come together. The first big change was the house. After Megan moved out, it felt empty, like a hollow shell of what it used to be. Every corner held memories, some good, some too painful to face. I decided it was time to let go. Selling the house wasn't easy, but it felt like the right move. I needed a fresh start, and so did my kids. We found a cozy new place not far from their school. It wasn't as big as the old house, but it had charm. A fenced yard where they could play, a small porch where I could sit with a coffee and watch the sunrise. It didn't take long for it to feel like home. Rebuilding my relationship with the kids became my top priority. They had been caught in the crossfire of something they didn't ask for, and I owed it to them to create a sense of stability. We started doing family nights, where we'd watch movies, play board games, or just cook dinner together. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it brought us closer. One night, as we were sitting around the table playing Monopoly, my daughter looked up at me and said, "Dad, you're smiling more these days." It caught me off guard. I hadn't even realized how much lighter I felt until she pointed it out. "Yeah, kiddo," I said, ruffling her hair. "I guess I am." My personal life took longer to sort out. After everything with Megan, the idea of trusting someone again felt impossible. But Carla and I stayed in touch, and our friendship grew deeper with each conversation. She had been through the same storm I had, and we found comfort in each other's company. We started meeting up for coffee, then lunch, then hikes with the kids. It was easy, natural in a way I hadn't expected. One afternoon, as we sat on a park bench watching our kids play, Carla turned to me and said, "Do you ever feel like maybe all of this had to happen for us to get here?" I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Maybe it did." We didn't rush into anything romantic, but there was an undeniable connection between us. A shared understanding that went beyond words. I don't know where it'll lead, but for the first time in a long time, I feel like I can trust someone again. As for Megan and Andrew, they've faded into the background of my life. I don't think about them often, and when I do, it's with a strange sense of detachment. Their choices define them, not me. I've moved on, and they've been left to deal with the wreckage they created. There's something empowering about realizing that the people who hurt you no longer have control over your life. For so long, their betrayal was the center of my world. Now it's just a story, a chapter in a book that I've closed. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, I reflected on everything I'd been through. The pain, the anger, the heartbreak. It had all shaped me in ways I never expected. I was stronger now, more self-aware, and more determined to build a life that was truly mine. The kids burst through the door, interrupting my thoughts with laughter and shouts about some game they were playing. I smiled, watching them chase each other across the yard. This was my life now, simple, peaceful, and filled with love. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that healing isn't linear. It's messy and painful, but it's also transformative. I've come to understand that the people who betray you don't define your worth. You do. For anyone reading this who's been through something similar, know this: you're stronger than you think. The betrayal doesn't have to break you. It can be the thing that sets you free. As for me, I'm moving forward one step at a time, and for the first time in years, I'm truly happy.